I still get uneasy thinking about this drive. It's one of those memories that makes my stomach tighten every time it crosses my mind. A couple years ago, I was making a last-minute overnight drive across several states to visit my brother who lives in a remote part of northern Utah. I had completely mixed up the dates for our plans, and because of that mistake, I basically forced myself into a miserable situation where I had to drive through the entire night to make it there on time. By the time I was hours into the drive, I was exhausted, irritated, and stressed out. Everything about the trip already felt like a mistake. Because of how tired I was, I didn't realize I'd made another one until it was too late. I had been on the same highway for over 100 miles when my GPS told me to exit. Somehow, I completely missed it. The moment I noticed, I looked down at the screen and muttered to myself, realizing what I'd done. There was nothing I could really do except keep driving and hope there would be somewhere ahead to turn around. I glanced back at the GPS, expecting it to start rerouting, but instead, it just sat there, stuck on the loading screen. After a minute of waiting, I assumed the obvious answer was just to find a place to turn around. The area I was in was extremely remote anyway, so there probably weren't many alternate routes. So I kept driving. But the strange thing was, there were no places to turn around. The road just kept going. About a mile past the exit I had missed, I drove past a car pulled over on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. It looked like a normal black sedan. At the time, I figured the driver was probably in a similar situation as me. Maybe they had missed something too, or were checking directions. I slowed slightly after passing it, just in case there was some kind of turnaround nearby. That's when the road suddenly changed. It quickly merged into a single lane and became much narrower, and thick woods began closing in tightly on both sides. It didn't feel like a highway anymore. It felt like some abandoned continuation of a road that people weren't supposed to be using. And whatever it actually was, I knew I definitely shouldn't have been there. So I pulled over to think. My GPS was still frozen on the rerouting screen, and my phone had no signal at all. I tried opening a few apps just to see if anything would load, but nothing worked. Outside the car, it was completely dark. There weren't any streetlights, and the trees on both sides of the road were so dense that the headlights barely illuminated anything beyond a few yards. I stepped out of the car just to get a better look around. Both sides of the road were surrounded by thick forest that looked completely untouched and uninhabited. I couldn't even see the other side of the highway that had originally been going in the opposite direction. It was just woods. Endless woods, which meant at some point earlier the highway must have split into separate roads, but I had no idea where. For a moment, I actually considered doing something really risky, turning around and driving the wrong direction back toward the exit. But I had already driven pretty far down this narrow road, and the idea of driving the wrong direction in total darkness felt incredibly unsafe. So I convinced myself the two roads ahead had to reconnect eventually. Surely there would be some kind of turnaround ahead. Right before I got back into my car, I glanced behind me down the road. And that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was someone walking in the road. The figure was still pretty far away, slowly heading in my direction. My first thought was that it had to be the person from that car I had passed earlier with the hazards, but at the same time it felt strange that they would leave their car and start walking down this empty road. Still, I didn't think much more about it. I got back into my car and continued driving. The road became rougher the further I went until eventually, maybe half a mile later, the road just ended. There was a barricade blocking the pavement. A metal roadblock fence stretched across the entire road. I parked and got out again to look closer. From what I could see, the paved road stopped there completely. It looked like maybe it continued as a dirt or gravel path deeper into the woods, but it was too dark to tell. And then I noticed something else. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Near the tree line ahead, there was a shape standing in the darkness. It was so unexpected that my brain refused to process it at first. I told myself it had to just be shadows shifting between the trees. But the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It was a person, standing completely still, watching me. A heavy feeling of dread settled in my chest. I slowly backed away toward my car and turned to get inside. And the moment I turned around, I nearly screamed. A man was standing right behind me. I hadn't heard him approach at all. It was the same man I had seen walking down the road earlier. He had a short beard, a buzz cut, and a hood pulled over his head. His expression was unreadable. For several long seconds, we just stared at each other. Then he spoke. "Road's closed," he said calmly. "You can't get out this way, ma'am." His voice was oddly casual, almost friendly. I quietly apologized, barely able to hide how nervous I suddenly felt. His eyes briefly shifted over my shoulder towards the woods before returning to me. "You okay?" he asked calmly. "You look a little shaken." The way he said it was strange, too friendly, like we already knew each other. I nodded quickly and told him I thought I might have seen something in the woods, but that I was probably just tired from driving all night. The moment I said that, his expression changed. He lowered his head slightly, forcing me to make eye contact with him. "What exactly did you think you saw?" he asked. The tone in his voice made my stomach drop. I instantly realized I shouldn't have said anything at all. Nothing," I stuttered quietly. I quickly opened my car door and got inside. The man stayed where he was for a moment before slowly stepping closer to my window as I started the car. I didn't wait around to see what he would do. I backed up, did a fast three-point turn, and sped down the road. A few minutes later, I passed the black sedan again, still sitting there with its hazard lights on. Finally, I reached the exit I originally missed and got the hell out of that area. To this day, I have no idea what was happening out there, but I have a terrible feeling about whatever was going on in those woods, and something tells me that if I had stayed longer or told that man what I saw near the trees, I probably would have gotten answers, just not the kind anyone would want. I'm writing this right after getting home from a holiday road trip while everything is still fresh in my mind, because honestly, the whole experience left me pretty shaken. The drive itself wasn't supposed to be anything special. It was a fairly long, overnight trip back home, mostly along a straight highway with almost nothing around for miles. With my work schedule, leaving late in the evening was the only way I could make it work, so around 7 p.m. I started the drive. For the first several hours, nothing happened at all. From about 7 until close to midnight, the drive was painfully boring. By that point, there were barely any cars left on the road, and once it got fully dark, every mile of highway looked exactly the same empty pavement, the same endless darkness on both sides. It got to the point where staying focused felt exhausting. Sometime around midnight, I finally saw headlights in the distance coming from the opposite direction. That highway was so long and straight that I could see the car for several minutes before it actually passed me. It was literally the only other vehicle I had seen in a while. I didn't think much about it when it went by, but out of habit, I checked my mirrors afterward. That's when I noticed something strange. The car's brake lights lit up bright red. In my rearview mirror, I saw it slow down noticeably and then shift lanes. Then, suddenly, it made a U-turn. At first, that confused me because there were no official U-turn areas anywhere along that stretch of road. The two sides of the highway were separated by a wide, grassy ditch. But this car didn't seem to care. It actually drove straight down into the ditch and climbed up onto my side of the highway. Now it was behind me. At first, I just assumed the driver desperately needed to turn around and didn't want to drive miles to find a proper exit. I figured they'd speed up, pass me, and go on their way. They did accelerate, but when they caught up to me, they slowed down, and instead of passing me, they matched my speed and stayed directly behind my car. That's when I started to feel a little uneasy. There was no way they could have noticed me specifically when we passed each other earlier. The road was dark and we were moving quickly in opposite directions. So why were they now just sitting behind me? For several minutes, they didn't move. Then something even stranger happened. The driver started flashing their headlights over and over again, high beams flashing repeatedly. There were no other cars anywhere on the road. We were completely alone out there, so there was no question the driver was trying to signal me. But it wasn't a normal flash like people do to warn about a speed trap or something. They just kept doing it. Again and again and again. It went on for miles. At that point, I had no idea what they wanted from me, and the flashing lights were starting to make me really uncomfortable. The worst part was that because it was so dark and their headlights were so bright in my mirrors, I couldn't actually see their car. I had no idea what kind of vehicle it was or who was inside. After a while, I saw a highway sign that said there was a rest area coming up in 3 miles. I immediately decided that was my best option. If I pulled off there, hopefully there would be other cars around. Even if people were just parked there sleeping, it would still feel a lot safer than being alone on the road with this guy. When the exit finally appeared, I took it. But the rest stop layout was nothing like I expected. The exit ramp spiraled downward and went underneath the highway through what looked like a small tunnel before leading to the parking area. So instead of having separate rest stops for each direction of traffic, both sides of the highway connected to the same one. It also meant the rest stop itself sat down in a sort of dip beneath the highway. Once I drove into the lot, it felt weirdly isolated. You couldn't see the highway anymore, you couldn't even hear it, and the entire parking lot was empty. Not a single car. I quickly checked my rearview mirror and didn't see any headlights behind me. That made me feel a little relieved. I figured the car following me must have continued down the highway instead of taking the exit. I pulled into a parking space close to the building. For the first time in a while, I took a deep breath and tried to relax. Sitting there, I realized how exhausted I actually was after hours of driving and that whole strange situation on the road. The building looked like it had bathrooms and a vending machine inside, so I decided to go in quickly while I was there. I locked my car and walked inside. I was only in the building for a minute or two. I thought about grabbing a drink for the rest of the drive, but it wasn't working, so I just turned around and went back outside. And the moment I stepped out, my stomach dropped. There was another car parked in the lot now. Despite the entire rest area being completely empty before, this car was parked only one space away from mine. My heart immediately started racing. I couldn't be completely sure it was the same car that had been following me earlier, but deep down, I was certain it was. The windows were heavily tinted, and the headlights were still on bright, making it impossible to see inside. Trying to stay calm, I walked back toward my car, but I had the overwhelming feeling that someone inside that vehicle was watching me. I quickly got in, shut the door, and put my keys into the ignition. But when I turned the key, nothing happened. The engine didn't even attempt to start. I tried again. Still nothing. A wave of adrenaline hit me instantly. That's when I realized something seriously was wrong. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I was terrified the person in the car next to me would see what I was doing and immediately come over. My voice was trembling as I explained to the operator where I was and that my car wouldn't start. But when I mentioned the car parked next to me that had been following me earlier, the woman on the phone suddenly sounded much more serious. Her tone changed immediately, and she started asking for more details very quickly, like this situation worried me more than I expected. She told me police were about 10 minutes away. During the entire call, I hadn't even looked directly at the car next to me. I was honestly afraid to what I might see. Then, suddenly, the car next to me started backing up. It slowly pulled out of the space and drove behind my car. Then it stopped, blocking me completely. A few seconds later, I heard a car door open. In my mirror, I saw a tall man wearing a dark winter jacket slowly walking toward my car. He stepped right up beside my window and leaned slightly down toward me. I was too scared to even turn my head to look at him, but I could feel him standing there, just staring at me through the glass. The man didn't say anything. He didn't try to open the door. He just stood there silently watching me while I described everything to the 911 operator. After about a minute, he slowly walked around the front of my car and moved to the other side. He circled the vehicle several times, like he was inspecting it. Then finally, he went back to his own car, got in, and slowly drove away. I watched his headlights disappear back through the tunnel. About 5 minutes later, a police officer arrived. He asked me what happened and said another officer was on the way to help with my car. But after confirming that I was okay, he immediately left to try and find the man who had been following me. Later, we discovered something disturbing. Someone had cut the ignition cable connected to my battery. I had no idea something like that could even be done so quickly. My car had to be towed out, and I got it repaired the next morning. I called the police station several times afterward asking if they had caught the man, but I never got any updates. And the part that still bothers me the most is this. That man followed me for miles, flashed his lights to get my attention, disabled my car, trapped me in an empty rest stop, but he never actually tried to break in. He just walked around my car, watching me. To this day, I still don't know what he was planning to do, or what might have happened if the police hadn't been on their way. I've been a truck driver for several years now, working for a small regional company based out of Montana. Our routes cover a lot of states, but most of my runs are through the Midwest and surrounding areas. Because of where our company is located, there really aren't many major highways that pass directly through us. That means a lot of my routes take me down long, empty roads that feel almost forgotten. Some nights I can drive for an hour or more without seeing another vehicle. Even other truckers are rare on some of those roads. Normally, it doesn't bother me. I'm used to the isolation. In fact, most of the time, the quiet makes the job easier. But there was one night that completely changed how I look at those lonely highways. It started as a normal run. I was hauling a load to a supplier that I had delivered to many times before. It was a route I knew well, and everything about the drive felt routine. Like always, I had my CB radio tuned to channel 19. That's the main channel truckers use to communicate with each other if necessary, or sometimes just to chat during long drives. Usually, though, the radio stayed silent for most of my shifts because there was nobody else within range. Around 1 in the morning, the radio suddenly crackled to life. At first, it sounded like it was trying to pick up a distant signal. There was static and faint noise, like someone was talking far away but the connection was weak. I could barely hear a voice through the interference. It was a man, but the signal was so distorted that I couldn't understand anything he was saying. I reached over and switched the radio off, then turned it back on again, thinking maybe it was just malfunctioning. But after that, the signal disappeared. The road went quiet again. I shrugged it off and continued driving. For the next several miles, everything stayed silent. No other cars, no buildings, nothing but empty darkness stretching out ahead of me. Then suddenly, the radio crackled again. This time, there was no voice at first, just loud static. The crackling kept getting louder and louder until it was almost irritating to listen to. I was about to shut it off again when a voice suddenly cut through the noise. It was the same man from earlier. The radio seemed to pick up in the middle of whatever he had been saying. His voice was still distorted, but I could make out a few words. What he said made my skin crawl. In a slow, monotone voice, the man started listing details. Gray cab, white doors, white trailer, blank sides. I felt a chill run down my spine. That was the exact description of my truck. Every detail, the color, the trailer, everything. And then, after listing those details, he calmly said the direction I was driving. Then the signal cut out completely. The radio went back to pure static. I just sat there staring at the dashboard for a moment. What the hell was that? I muttered to myself. I immediately checked all my mirrors. There were no vehicles behind me, none ahead of me, no headlights anywhere. If someone was talking on the radio nearby, I should have been able to see them, but the road was completely empty. The whole thing made me uneasy enough that I grabbed my phone and tried calling a friend who worked back at our warehouse. I just wanted to tell someone about the strange message, but my call dropped immediately. No signal. For the next half hour, I couldn't stop thinking about it. There was no logical explanation for how someone could have described my truck that accurately without being able to see it. Eventually, I remembered there was a small gas station coming up along the route. Even though I still had plenty of fuel, I decided to stop there. I figured I could top off the tank and maybe ask the attendant if any other truckers had been through recently using their radios. The gas station turned out to be extremely small and extremely remote. When I pulled into the lot, it became obvious right away that the convenience store portion was closed. But I had already turned in, so I decided to at least fill up before leaving. I parked beside one of the pumps and got out. As the fuel started pumping, I leaned against the side of the truck and looked around. Something about the place felt off. At first, I assumed it was just because I was alone in the middle of nowhere, but the longer I stood there, the more I felt this strange sense that I wasn't actually alone. It was like someone was watching me. The feeling became strong enough that I pulled the pump out early before the tank was even full. I just wanted to get back on the road. I climbed into the cab and started pulling out of the station, and the moment I did, I noticed headlights approaching from the road behind me. But something about the vehicle immediately stood out. Its headlights were off. The truck looked old and badly rusted. It was creeping down the road slowly. For a second, it looked like it was about to turn into the gas station, but the moment the driver saw me pulling out, the truck stopped. Just stopped right there in the road. Lights still off, waiting. That alone made my instincts scream that something wasn't right. I continued driving without slowing down. It was hard not to think the driver had been trying to avoid being seen, and that was incredibly suspicious. But even after leaving the station, the uneasy feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. A few minutes later, I came around a bend and suddenly slammed on the brakes. There was a car stopped sideways in the middle of the road. Standing next to it was a man waving his arms frantically at me. He started running toward my truck like he desperately needed help. But something didn't add up. His car didn't look damaged, and he didn't look injured. There was absolutely no reason for him to be blocking the road like that. As he ran toward my door, I instinctively checked my mirror, and my heart nearly stopped. Behind me, I saw the shape of another vehicle coming up the road. It was that same rusted truck from the gas station. In that moment, everything clicked. This was a setup. The man in front of me kept waving and yelling for me to stop, but I wasn't falling for it. I hit the gas and steered hard to get around the car. The guy barely jumped out of the way in time. I squeezed the truck around the car and back on the road. When I looked in my mirror, I saw the rusted truck pull up near the man. Another man got out. They looked like they were arguing with each other. I didn't stick around long enough to find out what they were saying. As soon as I had cell service again, I reported everything to the police. But by the time they checked the area, the vehicles and the men were gone. I still don't know exactly what their plan was, but if the man on the radio had been the driver of that truck, then he must have been following me long before I ever stopped at that gas station, which means he knew exactly what truck I was driving the entire time, and he had coordinated with the guy in the car ahead to trap me on that road. The only reason I'm here to tell this story is because I trusted my instincts and didn't stop. Because one wrong decision out there could have ended with me disappearing on the side of that empty highway, and no one would have ever known what happened.